After 2 days of hearings, a UK court will now decide if Julian Assange will be extradited to the United States. US lawyers argue the Wikileaks founder put lives at risk when he revealed the sources of his military and government leaks. If convicted, Assange could be sentenced to 175 years in jail. Joining me now is British broadcaster Emily Carver. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. What have been the key takeaways from the hearings this week?
Well, I think there is still a massive strength of feeling, even after so many years around this case. The streets of London, huge numbers of protesters outside the High Court, waving placards saying, "Free Julian Assange now," hundreds of golden ribbons outside the High Court. There is a huge amount of support, even after so many years, from people who believe this is a massive misuse of state power and a huge infringement on free speech. However, I must say the lawyers on the United States side do continue to claim, as you say, that Julian Assange risked people's lives by releasing these documents in the way that he did, and that their prosecution is very much based on law and evidence rather than politics, which is what his lawyers are claiming. They say he should be given permission to appeal. They continue to say this is on the grounds of free speech. This is the first time a publisher has been punished for revealing evidence like this, and they say that he could get the death penalty if he goes to the United States.
It's interesting. We just played some of the vision of the protesters. They're really backing Julian Assange, and it's interesting because he is an Australian. What's the feeling, though, Emily? Is there much optimism that this appeal will actually be upheld? What's the feeling?
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? This is being described as a last-ditch attempt for him to escape extradition. We're not expecting a judgment till well into next month. Also, there is the option that he still has to go to the European Court of Human Rights if this doesn't go his way. Of course, we've heard that he did not even turn up to court because of his ill health, so it does not look like he is in a good state. His lawyers, of course, are convinced that it will go in his way, and they're going to push this to the limit as far as it can go. But I'm not sure how optimistic he should be.
No, well, look, it's going to be interesting to see what that decision is. I want to move on now to the royals, because this week Prince William, he's been copping a lot of backlash for his statement on the Gaza-Hamas war. He, of course, acknowledged the terrible human cost of the conflict that has seen too many killed, and he called for the release of the remaining hostages. Now, look, this is the strongest response to the war by a senior royal, Emily, but he's had to do some damage control because royal aides have had to clarify that he's not calling for a two-state solution or for a ceasefire. Was it a poor move?
Well, this is the problem. His statement was quite vague, which left it very much open to interpretation. And Israel, their spokesperson, came back and said, of course, we want to stop the fighting like you do, but of course, there are conditions to that. I personally think that he perhaps should not have released such a statement. It opens him up to accusations of political bias, political meddling. It's very important that our future king is not seen to meddle in what is very important constitutionally for him not to be political. I personally believe this was a misstep from our future king. And also, if he comments on this ongoing conflict, which of course is hugely controversial, hugely contentious, opens up huge amounts of emotion from across the political spectrum, across the world. Indeed, does he then comment on every ongoing conflict? I think this puts him in a difficult position.
That's a very good point, and I'm sure he meant well by it, but it certainly hasn't been well received by no means. Now, the King has revealed he was reduced to tears by the many well wishes and messages of support that he received, of course, following his cancer diagnosis. What do you make of the reaction?
Well, it's quite interesting because, of course, we heard that Prince Harry was going to be talking to Good Morning America about the King's cancer diagnosis. And I don't know if you saw, but he looked to me like he was very uncomfortable answering questions about the King because, of course, he only had a meeting with him for reportedly 45 minutes. If that, very strained relations. But it's good to see that, of course, the King does seem to be in decent spirits, in good spirits. He's very keen to get back to his duties, which is wonderful. But of course, we've got the Princess Catherine, too, who's been in hospital for a rather long time.
Now, speaking of Prince Harry, there are rumours he and Meghan are heading in separate directions, suggesting that they each want a career separate from this nightmare Sussex brand. Let's be honest, it's been an absolute nightmare. Now, Meghan was announced as a new host of a little-known podcast company called Lemonada Media, while Harry, as you said, gave that interview to Good Morning America solo. So why are they divvying up their working lives, do you think?
Well, it's very interesting because they controversially updated their website to sussex.com. And now Prince Harry calls himself a humanitarian, a military veteran, a mental health advocate, and an environmental campaigner. Now, Meghan calls herself a feminist and champion of human rights and gender equity. So clearly they're attempting to lean into their particular areas of interest, always modest, into their particular areas of interest to sort of carve out separate identities. Now, we've heard for a while that perhaps they're heading in different directions. Perhaps there's a little rift in terms of where their goals are. But clearly what they're doing is very much under the banner of their titles, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. That is deeply controversial in this country, whether they should be able to use the royal crest and the royal family for their own commercial gain. But I do wonder whether there is so much interest in them as individuals or whether the interest is solely in what they can tell us about the royal family.
Well, I just wonder also if the interest has waned. I mean, now they're having to give themselves self-titles, for goodness sake. Oh, look, I mean, it's always one thing after another with these two. Emily Carver, thank you so much for joining us this evening.